Somewhere in the northern wilderness, a plant erupts from scorched earth before any other life dares return. It colonizes wildfire scars within weeks, painting the blackened landscape in brilliant magenta towers reaching 2 meters high. Multiple phytochemical analyses conducted in Scandinavian and Russian research institutions have documented polyphenol concentrations in dried fireweed leaves that exceed those measured in standard commercial green tea grades. Yet, this plant has been absent from Western botanical commerce for over 2 centuries. And the reasons are not scientific. The reasons are political. Indigenous peoples across Siberia and subarctic North America documented its use across centuries. Russian monasteries built entire seasonal traditions around its fermented leaves. Then a trade empire decided what the world would drink. The decision was not about nutrition. It was about profit roots. This is the story of fireweed, Chamaenerion angustifolium, a plant that refuses to stay buried. If the hidden history of forgotten plants speaks to you, consider subscribing to this channel. And by the end of this film, a single commercial document from 18th century London will change how you see every roadside weed. For at least 1,000 years, the people of northern Russia knew Chamaenerion angustifolium simply as Koporye. Medieval Novgorod manuscripts reference fermented fireweed leaves as a daily beverage among monks, merchants, and common people alike. The preparation involved careful wilting and oxidation, a process that transformed raw leaves into a richly colored, complex brew. This was not crude folk practice. It was sophisticated botanical knowledge transmitted across generations without interruption. By the 16th century, the town of Koporye near St. Petersburg had become a recognized production center for the export market. The product traveled under the name Koporye tea, later known across the continent simply as Ivan chai. Russian historical trade records document regular export of dried fireweed to Germany, France, and England. British merchants catalogued it alongside pepper, flax, and amber in Baltic port inventories. The plant had crossed from village tradition into international commodity. It sustained communities through long northern winters where no other crop survived. Its presence in monastery records, imperial ledgers, and folk pharmacopoeias tells a unified story. This was not a marginal plant. It was the botanical backbone of Russian domestic culture for a millennium. The British East India Company formalized control over the Chinese tea trade across the 17th and 18th centuries. By 1750, Chinese tea imports represented one of the most profitable commercial operations in imperial British history. Ivan chai from Russian sources offered European consumers a direct, cheaper alternative to the company's product. Historical trade pamphlets circulated in London during the 1790s began characterizing Russian plant-based teas as adulterated goods. The allegations described supposed mixing with ash, foreign leaves, and inferior plant matter. These claims spread through merchant correspondence and published trade circulars across European markets. No systematic botanical investigation at the time was conducted to support these accusations. But the commercial damage was immediate. European traders quietly withdrew from Koporye contracts. Russian export figures for fireweed products declined sharply through the early 19th century. By the 1840s, Ivan chai had effectively vanished from Western European market records. The East India Company's commodity filled every vacancy left behind. The distinction was never about chemistry. It was about which trade route carried political weight. Chamaenerion angustifolium earned its English name through direct ecological observation. After wildfire, it appears before almost all competing vegetation, sometimes within weeks of the blaze. Its rhizome network survives underground temperatures that eliminate most root systems in the same soil layer. The botanical term for this capacity is pyrophytic adaptation, an evolutionary specialization for post-disturbance environments. A mature fireweed plant produces between 30,000 and 80,000 seeds annually. Each seed carries a silken fiber that allows wind to carry it kilometers from the parent plant. The plant thrives in burned forests, roadsides, avalanche corridors, and clear-cut slopes across the entire boreal zone. Everywhere the modern world disrupts the earth, fireweed moves in. This is not ecological weakness. This is a survival strategy refined across millions of years of geological and climatic change. The plant also functions as a pioneer species, stabilizing disturbed soil and creating conditions for secondary forest regeneration. It does not wait for an invitation to restore what was broken. This biological architecture survived the clearing of Siberian forests, the burning of English heathland, and 2 centuries of botanical erasure. Nature has always maintained a longer memory than commerce. Modern phytochemical research on Chamaenerion and angustifolium has documented a phenolic profile of unusual complexity. The plant's leaves contain significant concentrations of elagitanins, a class of hydrolyzable polyphenols documented for antioxidant activity. Among these, winothion B, a macrocyclic elagitanin, has been identified as a primary bioactive compound in multiple peer-reviewed studies on the Epilobium genus. Finnish and Russian research programs documented total polyphenol concentrations in fireweed leaf extracts that compare favorably to commercially standardized Camellia sinensis varieties. Additional compounds identified include flavonoids, beta-cytosterol, provitamin A, and ascorbic acid. The nutritional data was not constructed by marketing departments. It was produced by chromatographic analysis in academic laboratories. But the lab results tell a startling story. A plant that grows without cultivation, in scorched and disturbed soil, carries a biochemical complexity that billions of dollars of agricultural infrastructure have struggled to approximate in commercial crops. The East India Company won the trade war. The phytochemistry was never on their side. The distinction between a weed and a crop has always been economic, not biological. By the early 20th century, Ivan chai production across Russia had been reduced to isolated rural villages. The imperial court had adopted Chinese and Indian tea as markers of European cosmopolitan identity. Traditional botanical knowledge of fireweed fermentation became oral tradition confined to specific forest communities in northern Russia. The Soviet industrial era further marginalized craft botanical practices in favor of standardized agricultural output. In Western botanical literature, fireweed appeared primarily as an ecological indicator, a marker of land disturbance, not a valued plant. No market presence, no commercial harvest, no institutional memory. The word weed rewrites a plant's entire history. Language shapes what a civilization chooses to value. A plant that had crossed trade routes from the Baltic to the Thames was reclassified as evidence of agricultural failure. European and North American field guides listed it among invasive and ruderal species. Children in school learned to recognize it as a problem. The same leaf that monks once carefully fermented and czars once taxed became a symbol of neglected land. This reclassification required no scientific evidence. It required only the erasure of the commercial network that once gave the plant its meaning. Since the early 2000s, renewed interest in traditional northern botanicals has brought fireweed back into academic research frameworks. Finnish, Estonian, and Russian laboratories have revisited the plant's phenolic profile using modern high-performance liquid chromatography methods. Historical documentation of Koporye tea production has been recovered from provincial Russian archives and monastery records by independent historians. Eastern European herbal markets report growing demand for dried fireweed products, particularly across Germany, Poland, and Scandinavia. In permaculture and forest garden systems, the plant is being recognized for its soil-stabilizing function and near-zero cultivation requirements. It requires no artificial fertilizer. In temperate climates, it needs no supplemental irrigation beyond natural rainfall. It self-seeds on disturbed ground without human intervention. For ecological gardeners, it represents a category that mainstream horticulture lacks the vocabulary to value: useful, resilient, and free. The growing community is beginning to notice. Foraging networks in Scandinavia and the Pacific Northwest document its integration into mixed perennial systems and agroforestry designs. The plant never needed revival. It was always growing at the edge of the cleared field, waiting for the vocabulary to catch up with the biology. Chamaenerion angustifolium does not require an imperial license to exist. It grows across the Northern Hemisphere without assistance, on every continent bearing a temperate or boreal climate. It has survived ice ages, wildfire cycles, and centuries of commercial invisibility. The polyphenols documented in its leaves were not engineered. They were shaped by millions of years of evolutionary pressure and environmental adaptation. A trade dispute between empires did not erase this plant. It only erased the human infrastructure that once recognized it. That infrastructure can be rebuilt. Every gardener who plants fireweed on a disturbed patch of earth reclaims a tradition older than the East India Company. Every researcher who documents its phenolic profile challenges a silence that was never scientific. The argument for botanical diversity has never required a corporate sponsor. It only requires memory. The field still burns somewhere in the northern wilderness right now, and fireweed still rises from it, exactly as it always has. History is not what was lost. It is what was waiting to be found.